How do you feel about remakes? I'd wager you're probably indifferent towards them or against them entirely. It also might depend on if you're a bigger fan of movies than video games or vice versa. Combined with the amount of franchises and sequels in popular culture, it can feel suffocating if you're looking to the mainstream for exciting, new, original video games or films. This year we've already seen a much derided live-action Snow White remake, and more recently a live-action Lilo and Stitch remake from Disney too, which will be the 12th and 13th direct remakes of a cartoon that Disney have made, starting with Cinderella 10 years ago. That number isn't even including films like Maleficent, Cruella, or Tim Burton's really terrible Alice in Wonderland film. Those are part of the same oeuvre, but at least managed to be reasonably different takes on the animated originals. Not only that, but there's a sterile-looking How to Train Your Dragon live-action remake in cinemas. And let's face it, if you're a big soulless corporation with your own beloved intellectual properties, seeing how much money Disney is generating simply by telling the exact same story over and over again is surely a mouth-watering prospect. In video games too, we've recently seen Capcom working their way through their own Resident Evil catalog, remaking entry after entry. Dead Space got remade, Oblivion, Persona 3 and now Persona 4 as well. Even Call of Duty titles are getting remade when we already get a brand new game each year regardless. We have a Metal Gear Solid 3 remake on the way soon, as well as The Witcher, Splinter Cell, Max Payne, Prince of Persia. The list goes on and on. For a while I found myself feeling quite negative towards remakes, and all those films, as well as some of those video games I've just mentioned, are a huge reason as to why. But I wanted to really elaborate on those feelings. Because in theory, remakes can be an exciting prospect. Some films I really love are remakes, and there are some remakes that I think, while aren't as good as the original, are still something that can stand alone as an interesting take or transformation of the source material. Also in general, isn't every piece of art just a collage of influences anyway? Some might argue that a remake is an honest expression of love for someone else's work. I want to look into remakes in games and films. Are they really that bad? But for now, what about in other mediums older than films? Before films or video games, were people remaking literature or music records? What's funny is, the idea of a remake in book form probably doesn't appeal to anyone in the same way that the idea of a remake of a film or video game will get people's ears perked up. Obviously, books aren't quite as much of a commercial powerhouse as they used to be, but nobody is clamoring for a remake of the Harry Potter books, for example, whereas the upcoming TV show adaptation is probably getting some people excited, even though we already have a series of pretty good film adaptations. People will translate books into other languages, and sometimes take minor creative liberties in this regard, or update ancient texts to modern language, such as Homer's The Odyssey, taking some liberties to make the story read like a modern-day novel. Commonly, if an author wants to retell a story, it will be done differently or from a new perspective. For example, Wicked, which is a book that the popular stage musical was based off of, which in turn the recent film was based off. This book is a partial retelling of the 1900 novel The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, but focused on the villain, providing extensive context for the character. While both novels roughly tell the same story, Gregory Maguire's take in Wicked elaborates and transforms the tales so much that they become very different books for different audiences, with The Wonderful Wizard of Oz being for children and Wicked being more for young adults. Maybe an example less creatively interesting of a book remake is from Stephanie Meyer, author of the mega successful Twilight book series. Meyer has actually written 2 reinterpretations of her very own original Twilight novel, one where the 2 lead characters are gender swapped, and another which is the first book from the perspective of Edward rather than Bella. Realistically, there are often retellings, reinterpretations, or adaptations in literature, but rarely, if ever, is something like Jon Favreau's The Lion King, a straight-up shot-for-shot, line-for-line retelling aiming to tell the exact same story in the exact same way again, seen in books. In music, remakes are cover songs. These are obviously very prevalent, and even sometimes are hugely successful, eclipsing the original. Some great examples are I Will Always Love You by Whitney Houston, a cover of a Dolly Parton song. Parton's version is more delicate, while Houston commands your attention with her spectacular voice. Hurt by Johnny Cash took a Nine Inch Nails song and remarkably added a new dimension to it. The Nine Inch Nails version sounds angry and cynical, whereas Cash sounds weary and somber. I didn't know that Girls Just Want to Have Fun by Cyndi Lauper was a cover until researching for this video, and the original is by a dude too, which makes the song have a much different tone. Including a cover song on an album is often seen as a little treat. It's fun to hear different artists' takes on other songs, especially if they transform the song in their image. Some artists even do entire albums of covers, such as David Bowie's Pin-Ups or Rage Against the Machine's Renegades. All of the Beatles, aside from George, have a cover album in amongst their solo discography. Even Weezer did one as well not too long ago. This is all to say that nobody is particularly mad or upset about covers in music. Why is this? Well, probably because the major records released each year are almost never cover albums. Neither are the biggest songs generally covers. Music is an industry that likes to look forward as much as it looks back. A mega successful song like Blinding Lights by The Weeknd very clearly owes some of its success to the fact it sounds a bit like Take On Me, but the track is considerably different in terms of lyrics. Though there are some little subsections of music that do evoke the same sort of creatively bankrupt feeling as the Disney remake slop. Let me tell you about this guy right here. Believe it or not, he's not just famous for one of the funniest videos from the COVID era.
So, shout out to his family.
This is David Guetta, and during the late 2000s and early 10s, his big EDM songs were inescapable. However, he still pumps out a few tracks that are mega successful, and recently his formula has essentially been to remake popular dance songs and update them for current tastes by refreshing the production and adding a trendy guest singer. It goes beyond sampling or a cover, it's something that's hard to really pinpoint. I'm Good Blue by David Guetta and featuring BB Rexha takes the I'm Blue Dabba Dee song from the 90s that had the music video of the hottest graphics of 1998 and reshapes it ever so slightly in the image of modern EDM festivals. It was mega successful. Nobody really seemed to care about the creative bankruptcy involved, and so next we got a remake of What Is Love by Haddaway, featuring Anne-Marie and Coi Leray. Somehow getting worse, he next made a remake of a pretty big song in Europe called The Logical Song by German band Scooter that just astroturfs all the fun of that song so much. I think the whole appeal of Scooter was how absurdly serious they took their massive Eurobeat, so making it into a boring pop song with Kim Petras is just so lame, dude. Oh, and by the way, the Scooter song is, of course, already a cover of a song by Supertramp. You can never escape remakes. It doesn't end there because there's also a remake of the Numa Numa song, best remembered for its early YouTube era meme, reimagined with car commercial music heroes, One Republic. Basically, the whole gist of this is that they play this music in bars and clubs all the time because they evoke a song you already know, but still update it enough that it can fit within a DJ's playlist of other modern EDM or top 40 pop music. Now let's loop back to movies. The attitude towards remakes in movies is probably the most contentious. It always seemed to me that the idea of a remake was often seen as a cynical cash grab, but where did this reputation come from, and is it deserved? After all, remakes of films have been common for decades. For example, a huge film like the 1959 epic rendition of Ben-Hur starring Charlton Heston was actually a remake of a silent film from 1925. But the 70s and 80s were where a lot of big remakes started to be produced. There's a 1976 King Kong remake, Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake, Cat People, The Blob, The Thing, or do you remember the 2010s era of expensive yet soulless remakes of classic action films? RoboCop, Total Recall, Point Break, Carrie, Poltergeist. Literally not a single one of these remakes comes anywhere close to touching the original. And I bet when I say Total Recall, you automatically picture Arnold Schwarzenegger on Mars, not Colin Farrell in a blue-tinted, futuristic CGI city. Or when I say Point Break, your mind will go to Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze. Definitely not this guy and this guy. Another common trend that popped up during the late 90s was the incessant need to remake any popular foreign film. And I don't even mean films that weren't in the English language, they'd remake British films too to cater them more to an American audience. Japanese horror took off in the late 90s and early 2000s with films like Ring and Ju-on, both of which were hastily remade with American audiences in mind. The trend of remaking foreign films seems to have died down a bit recently, evidenced by Parasite being successful enough to win Best Picture. Generally, foreign media seems to be a bit more accepted in the mainstream, like how Squid Game caught on so hard and anime isn't some fringe interest now. But still, randomly stuff will pop up like last year's Speak No Evil, which is a remake of a Danish film, though bear in mind the Danish version released just 2 years earlier was also an English language film. It just wasn't really suited to be a popcorn thriller like the remake aimed to be. For me, the news that a film is being remade usually is met with nothing more than a shrug.
I don't care.
Like, I think Lilo and Stitch is a really nice film, but the idea of yet another soulless, live-action, CGI-infused Disney remake just doesn't interest me at all in principle. I'd much rather watch the original again. Then, reading about the changes they made to the original, it all seems cynically implemented too. When I hear about a remake of American Psycho, I also roll my eyes, until I see that it's being made by Luca Guadagnino, the Italian filmmaker behind great films like Call Me By Your Name, Challengers, and most importantly, Suspiria. If you don't know Suspiria, it's an Italian horror classic from 1977 by Giallo master Dario Argento. It's a thrilling, neon-lit, endearingly silly tale of a girl who finds out that her dance academy is actually a witch's coven. Guadagnino's remake takes the core plot and develops something that's tonally alien to the original. It's far more scary, gory, and uncomfortable, with newly added thematic context. Really, the most ideal remakes would come around when someone who loves an existing film wishes to not just create a homage or imitation, but imprint their own influence over it in a tasteful manner, as Guadagnino has done with Suspiria. So count me as cautiously optimistic for the American Psycho remake if it does come to pass. I find that the best film remakes, like Suspiria, are ones done with an auteur's vision behind them. The Departed is a remake of a Hong Kong thriller, Infernal Affairs, but Martin Scorsese and writer William Monahan arguably elevate things with the Boston set Departed. David Cronenberg's take on The Fly eclipses the original due to a more grotesque body horror angle. The 2001 Ocean's 11 film by Steven Soderbergh modernized the Frank Sinatra starring original to an incredible effect, becoming a defining film in the heist genre. John Carpenter's The Thing blows the 50s original out of the water with its pin-drop tension and outstanding special effects. This version also blows its own sort of remake, sort of prequel from 2011 out of the water too, which puzzlingly scrapped its practical SFX for shoddy CGI midway through production. The auteur approach doesn't always work though. For example, I love Spike Lee, but his take on Oldboy has a distinct stench of why about it, hardly like a typical Spike Lee film which are filled with so much fire and character. Though perhaps to his credit, it was a film drastically recut by the studio, so maybe there's a good version of the Oldboy remake waiting one day to be released. Arguably, however, the most important movie remake of all time is Gus Van Sant's 1998 version of Psycho. There's some interesting backstory behind this. Gus Van Sant struck gold when Good Will Hunting released in 1997 and became a mega hit on a modest budget, winning the hearts of audiences and critics. As such, he got some power to pitch whatever he wanted to Universal, and he chose to remake Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 classic, Psycho. Not just remake it either, but to film it as a shot-for-shot, line-for-line recreation. When asked why, Van Sant was transparent on the appeal of marketing a familiar property, and wanted to do a remake in a way that no one had really attempted before, by retracing everything about the original. As such, he got to make a shot-for-shot remake of Alfred Hitchcock's classic film in color, with a $60 million budget and starring Vince Vaughn of all people as Norman Bates. Bear in mind that Hitchcock's Psycho is already an adaptation of a book, but Van Sant's version is entirely based off Hitchcock's film. This 1998 version of Psycho is something that I would position as a bit of an experiment. How far can you push a remake before the public catches on and declares it pointless and creatively bankrupt? Gus Van Sant toys with the very notion of remaking a piece of art and creates possibly one of the most expensive and vital experimental films of all time. I could probably make a whole video about Psycho 98 because I think it's such an interesting film with a weird, uncanny feeling that you can't quite find in anything else. On the surface though, it's a film that struggles to make a case for itself. What is the point of remaking a movie like this when the original is still readily available? However, there's a strange appeal to this version of Psycho in how simultaneously it feels exactly the same and completely different to the original, both at once. While the film has the same script and aims to copy Hitchcock's staging and camera movements, the end result cannot replace the original. Some characters are performed slightly differently, being filmed in color ensures certain scenes feel completely different visually, and tension is built in ways that prey upon your expectations. William H. Macy looks like a kid trying on a suit for the first time. Vince Vaughn feels a lot more dangerous by default than Anthony Perkins because of his empty grin, dead eyes, and tall stature. While Macy goes for one-to-one replication in his performance, Julianne Moore adds her own distinct spin to hers. Things clash in strange ways. Psycho was always a film that exploited your expectations. It's got many twists and turns which played with how films were typically structured, creating something that was revolutionary in 1960s pop culture. But Psycho 98 exploits your expectations differently. You wonder the whole time, will there be a curveball? But there aren't any. Its slight changes feel uncanny, like returning to somewhere from your childhood and it not quite living up to the picture in your fond, nostalgic memories. This remake of Psycho feels like it only exists to be viewed within the scope of the original. It's an impressive imitation, and while its value is debatable, I do enjoy it for being such a strange feeling film. It's like dreaming of a past event, but you're there in your current body and mind. Something feels really off. Psycho 98 didn't make back its budget and was met with a tepid response from movie-going audiences and critics. I do respect it for setting the bar that shot-for-shot remakes are not really something that we want. While it's interesting as a one-off experiment, it would be exhausting if shot-for-shot remakes like this were a regular feature at the box office. Interestingly though, this approach to remakes, which Gus Van Sant tried with Psycho, is commonplace in video games. And unlike Psycho 98 being held mostly in distaste, people clamor for the equivalent of shot-for-shot remakes in the gaming medium. In fact, it's usually preferred to a new take on the property. This is where things get weird, because while remakes are often successful in movies, there is rarely a set of rabid fans asking for, say, mega popular classics like Back to the Future, E.T. or The Goonies to be remade, even though I'm sure each could easily be updated with contemporary settings and new CGI effects. But in parallel, you go to YouTube video comments or a Reddit thread of some popular video game from over 15 years ago, and watch as so many people in the comments salivate for a remake. Simpsons Hit and Run, Chrono Trigger, pretty much anything that you can't access easily on a modern gaming console or PC. Gamers love to demand remakes and remasters from their Reddit accounts and tell the marketers who are reading that it will print money. To clarify what counts as a remake in the medium of video games, it's a game that's being built again from the ground up. There's also ports and remasters, which are not quite remakes but rather just making the original game available on different hardware and selling it again, kind of like releasing a movie on DVD and then later on Blu-ray. An easy example of this is The Last of Us. This is the original on PS3. Now here's a remastered port of the original for PS4 that's the exact same, just enhanced. And finally, here is The Last of Us Part 1, which is a remake, rebuilt from the ground up for the PS5. There's even a TV show that often aims to one-to-one replicate a lot of the scenes from the game. They're really hell-bent on telling this story over and over. I guess the equivalent to a port that's exactly the same except with maybe a few quality of life changes is something like George Lucas's Star Wars Special Edition. And these films still to this day have a bad reception, though mostly for the fact that the original cuts are still officially unavailable and rely on extremely dedicated fans to restore them themselves. Spielberg even remastered E.T. and used CGI to replace these cops' guns with walkie-talkies, which is objectively hilarious. Like, bro, you're in America, of course there's guns. Though the pushback was so intense that he walked back the changes and apologized. I have a sort of begrudging respect for George Lucas for never budging on his incredible improvements like this extended jizz song and dance number in Return of the Jedi. In the medium of video games, the standard for remaking is something like a Psycho 98, rather than a new take such as Suspiria 2018 or John Carpenter's The Thing. Let's take the 3DS remakes of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. These are pretty much functionally the same games as the N64 originals, just with different graphics, but they've been coded again from scratch. The developers, Grezzo, do not implant almost any of their own ideas or iterate on anything already done in the N64 game. However, unlike with Psycho, not many people are disavowing the Zelda remakes as pointless. Some people might even consider them the definitive way to experience those games. Really, if you examine it, a large team of people have spent time painstakingly recreating another piece of art, when the original was always there. Ocarina of Time never went away, just like how Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho never went away. The thing about video games is that the seemingly rabid thirst for remakes could largely just be a thirst for accessibility. Unlike films, the hardware in which you play games on has been aged out quite fast. And setting up an old console to play an older game requires a bit of effort, which a lot of people will not entertain in a Netflix, Amazon, TikTok era of instant gratification. Not just that, but so many retro games these days are ludicrously inflated in price, especially if it's something that wasn't popular when it initially came out. Or maybe it didn't even come out in your region at all. Like, did you know the 1995 Square Enix RPG Chrono Trigger, these days often considered one of the best games of all time, didn't come out in Europe or Australia until 2009, with a port for the Nintendo DS. Last year, Nintendo remade Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, which is one of my all-time favorite GameCube games. If you stick to your morals, the only way before the remake to play this game was to hop on eBay, get extorted and land a copy of the original game on GameCube, dig out an old GameCube and play it on a TV that supports SCART cables. Or of course you could just download the ISO and boot it up on Dolphin to play in 1080p HD. But this is morally bankrupt and Nintendo wants you to go to jail for doing this. If Nintendo had made a GameCube emulator, something they're very capable of doing by the way, as they have done for SNES, N64 and many other consoles, and made Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door available for purchase in its original form, I think demand for a remake would have vanished. It's funny that the very next year after this remake came out, Nintendo reveals that the Switch 2 will have a GameCube emulator. You can guarantee they won't be offering The Thousand Year Door for it though. Rubbing salt in the wound, this Switch remake doesn't really add anything major. It's just got some solid new quality of life improvements, improved graphics, and also they halved the frame rate. which is puzzling because to me, why remake any game if you're going to make it worse in such a way? Hilariously, this means that currently the best way to play The Thousand Year Door is still on an emulator, just via a Switch emulator instead now, so you can boost the frame rate back up to 60. This is one of the most extreme examples, but the concept of a remake that is only developed to make consumers pay for accessibility of an older title is not uncommon. However, it's worth noting that people don't actually want just straight by-the-books accessible ports if they're paying. I'll point you towards a video by Punchy that covers this in more detail, but when Konami released Metal Gear Master Collection, people were upset that the games were straight rips of the originals, with only the bare essentials updated to make them work on modern PCs and consoles. People want the games to be the exact same, but with updated graphics and maybe some quality of life improvements. The upcoming Metal Gear Solid 3 remake seems to be exactly that. To brighten things up a bit, I'll say some video game remakes that I did think were very worthwhile. Resident Evil 2 plays completely different to the tank-controlled original and comes across as a smart update with loads of great twists and an incredible atmosphere. It doesn't replace the original, which I would consider a substantially different game. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, and in particular Heart Gold and Soul Silver, were definitive updates on the earlier Pokemons. They don't really replace the originals, but they refine and optimize them up to the status quo at that time for the series. Final Fantasy VII Remake is maybe my favorite example of a video game remake, because it's sort of a remake and sort of not at the same time. It's like the Neon Genesis Evangelion rebuild movies, something that at first seems like a straight play-by-play remake, before becoming something fairly different. Not everything in this fully works for me. If anything, I'd like for it to fully unleash itself from running through the plot beats of the original Final Fantasy VII, but it's definitely an interesting take on a remake. But can you even win with a video game remake? You can do it like Final Fantasy VII and diverge heavily from the original to become something new, akin to a sequel or side story, but so many people will be purchasing this game expecting to see the PS1 game faithfully recreated with melt-your-face graphics and modern game design. Making a game which plays upon your expectations and delivers something familiar, yet different, is interesting but bound to turn off lots of people. Or you can be like Spyro Reignited Trilogy and aim for one-to-one authenticity in gameplay, only for fans to chastise you anyway, because you went a bit too far away from the designs of the PS1 polygon blob characters. Just like Psycho 1998 proved, you can never quite recreate something one-to-one. It's definitely more possible in the realm of video games, since you don't have to worry about actors, performances, and locations. But there are countless examples in video games that show that even subtle little differences in controls, voice acting, or lighting can throw off players who are chasing their nostalgic memories of playing the original version of the game. Playing the Spyro remakes to chase nostalgia pretty much gives me a similar feeling to watching Gus Van Sant's Psycho. It's exactly the same as when I was a kid, but also it can't really compare at the same time. So much of it is exactly the same, only more modern feeling, and yet whenever there's a slight change that doesn't add up to my memories, it feels jarring and weird. This is all to say that remakes inherently aren't a bad thing. Every once in a while getting an updated version of one of your favorite games with new graphics, quality of life improvements, and modern game design features is a fun little treat. Or sometimes a remake can be a new take on something much loved, that steps aside from the original shadow to stand alone. However, imagine if the music landscape was as flooded with covers similar to how movies and video games are so flooded with remakes. What if Sabrina Carpenter, instead of performing her own original music, just covered the top hits of Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and other massive 90s and 2000s pop stars? It doesn't seem likely in this landscape, but yet in films and especially video games, a cornerstone of the entire market is producing remakes. This isn't me trying to be cynical, because there are lots and lots of really interesting films and games that come out every single month that are original or at the very least not paint-by-numbers remakes. However, so much of big-budget mainstream cinema and gaming do end up being just that. So many companies are putting all their money towards remakes, which aren't innovating. By design often, they're insisting the devs spend years of their life recreating something someone's already done, and sometimes updating it with stock modern sensibilities, like an over-the-shoulder camera. But ideally, we want real creative humans using said creativity for something more than just painstakingly making such by-the-books remakes, like a Silent Hill 2, Shadow of the Colossus, Crash N. Trilogy, Dead Space, or Ocarina of Time 3D. Unfortunately, the way that the video game console market in particular works is that companies will always be able to hold older games hostage. Even if Nintendo are letting you play Switch games on the Switch 2, you'll have to pay a premium to enjoy them at a higher frame rate and fidelity. They could have released Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door as a Nintendo Online perk, but instead they remade it one-to-one, except with a worse frame rate. I appreciate the quality of life improvements, but was this really worth it? Intelligent Systems is an amazing studio, and they've been tasked with a creatively bankrupt project instead of a new Paper Mario title. I also hate the arguments that companies put out remakes to gauge interest for new titles. Like I have to buy Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door if I ever want to see a new original Paper Mario game in that style. Otherwise they might punish us and make Sticker Star HD or something. Or I have to buy the Dead Space remake to fund the Dead Space 2 remake, and then maybe they'll make a new title. As it turns out, the Dead Dead Space remake didn't sell well enough, and now we're never going to see another Dead Space title as long as EA owns the rights. Wouldn't we have preferred a new Dead Space to be made instead of this remake? You'll not see them remake many games that could actually do with a remake either. While running through the Resident Evil games, they skipped over Code Veronica, which is a flawed title with lots of interesting aspects that could be elaborated on and improved in a remake. But in terms of marketing, the Code Veronica brand is far less valuable than Resident Evil 2 or 4. It all leads to a present where we're getting repackaged stuff from 10 to 20 years ago again and again. But what happens 20 years from now? Remakes of the remakes? Will we be getting remakes of the remakes of Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil 4 in 2045? Because there never will be enough remakes or a definitive version of any game. These new versions of Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil 4 are cutting edge now, but in 15 years, maybe they'll feel antiquated. With the way AI is developing, maybe there'll be AI features in video games that become the norm, and a new generation of kids can't imagine playing a game without a built-in AI assistant. Or maybe we could just let AI make all these remakes. Train an AI to study classic games and set it to make a HD update of your chosen game. If you encounter something that you feel isn't up to how you remembered it, ask the AI to remake that element on the fly.
Huh?
With films too, a project as creatively bankrupt as a Lilo & Stitch remake seems ripe to be passed on to AI. Feed it the original 2002 film, and ask for it to be remade into a 2020 sterile nostalgia trip for Disney adults. Maybe by 2030 we'll be getting the world's first AI Disney remake. Just for clarity, I think that all these examples are a nightmare future, where creativity is outsourced to AI. But producing remakes might just be one of the least creatively interesting aspects of working in these industries. So maybe if AI is inevitable, we let it make all the remakes slop to appease the people who just want to watch and play the same things over and over. So, are remakes actually that bad? Well, not really. As saturated as culture feels with them, there's still plenty of high quality original material coming out all the time that you might just have to dig around a little for. Most stuff is still fairly accessible, and if you look up how to use emulators and download ROMs on ISOs, you're pretty much sorted for 90% of the games out there. Often, just playing a game on Dolphin will be a better experience than a lazy port, especially in the case of Nintendo games. However, I'd argue that so many high-profile games no longer being innovative is stunting the growth of video games as a medium. Gaming in particular is a much younger medium than films, and has always been a lot more liberal with remakes, like how quickly they remade the original Resident Evil and Gen 1 Pokemon titles. There's a distinct chance of the video game market becoming more and more saturated with remakes. The current remake cycle is set up in a way that it will likely never end, unless the demand ends, and the demand can feel fierce sometimes. In movies too. Original movies don't do well, unfortunately, leading to remakes being a safe bet. While Snow White recently flopped, before that Disney remakes were always a success. I can only hope that Snow White flopping means that audiences are no longer interested in these remakes. But this Lilo & Stitch film is going to make $1 billion, and both critics and audiences seem to like it. There's very little pushback to remakes in movies and especially video games. Think about how people would react if an E.T. remake or a Lord of the Rings movie remake were announced. Whereas the equivalent in video games would be celebrated. Even when online, it seems like the reaction to the Lion King remake was so starkly negative. It's still one of the most successful films of all time. Remakes will not stop. Sometimes they might be good, but most of the time they'll probably be a waste of time. Don't trust mainstream outlets or your coworker who watches Netflix slop every night and comes in saying, "Hey man, the Cowboy Bebop remake wasn't that bad," only for you to then watch it and slowly put your head in your hands as you realize it actually is, in fact, that bad. I don't think there's anything we can do to stop remakes. I just hope they don't continue to dominate the medium of films, and especially video games, as much as they already do.